Sticking to this theme, a team of oceanographers are warning that existing climate change models are downplaying the effects of melting glaciers on sea levels. In Greenland, research shows an alarming acceleration in the rate ice shelves are melting. CNN's Phil Black tracked down the scientists who think they've found out why it's happening.
The icebergs of Surmullik Fjord are beautiful, often enormous and very old. They've travelled far, slowly moving from Greenland's frozen interior to join the world's oceans. All of these giant blocks of frozen fresh water come from the Greenland ice sheet, deposited by glaciers. When that happens, they contribute to increases in sea levels. It's an ancient process, but it's getting faster, and it's overtaking all predictions. Scientists are working to understand why. A team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute believes part of the answer is underwater. A year ago, the scientists left 2 instruments at the bottom of the fjord to record water temperature, salinity and other measurements. This is the recovery mission.
Roger, roger. Should be 60 meters directly ahead of us. 60 meters directly ahead. Roger, big tail.
The instruments were designed to release and float to the surface when triggered with a sonar key. After a long hunt, they find one.
That's it. That's what we're looking for.
The other remains on the bottom, or trapped beneath an iceberg. The challenges of scientific research in an Arctic fjord.
We're getting excellent data now. We're going to deploy 9 more moorings.
Oceanographer Fiamma Strano believes Greenland's glaciers are accelerating, at least partly because of major changes in ocean currents caused by the warming of the planet. She says lots of warm, salty, subtropical water is now flowing right up to the glaciers and melting them underwater.
Pretty much throughout the fjord, beneath 150 meters, the water is somewhere between 2 and 4 degrees, which is very warm. I mean, 4 degrees might not seem very warm if you want to swim in it, but it's very warm in terms of melting capabilities.
Recent theories like this, explaining the changes to Greenland's glaciers, aren't included in existing climate change models.
The scientists believe their work here shows that sea levels will rise much faster and sooner than current modelling predicts. And they believe that means the information being used by world leaders and policymakers to try and come up with a united strategy on climate change is out of date, and it significantly underestimates just how serious the problem will be.
That's why environmental activists with Greenpeace have also come to Greenland. The crew of the Arctic Sunrise is working with independent scientists here, promoting their research ahead of December's International Climate Change Summit in Copenhagen.
Certainly the scientists that are studying climate change impacts here in Greenland in 2009 have a much more urgent and dire warning than they had in 2005.
The Copenhagen Summit's goal is to thrash out a new agreement on carbon emissions to replace the Kyoto Treaty, signed 12 years ago. While a minority of scientists question man's role in the warming of the planet, the great majority say the world's climate has changed alarmingly since Kyoto. And they say the proof is here, among the melting icebergs of Greenland. Phil Black, CNN, Surmullik Fjord, southeastern Greenland.
Today we are talking to our blogger bunch about how much responsibility the U.S. as a major greenhouse gas emitter should bear in combating global warming. We're also talking about what priority this issue should be for President Obama. Of course, he faces a lot of other priorities, the economy, health care, and several other major issues on his plate. So while I talk about that, let's get Namwa Delaney in here because she's looking at what you're saying.
Yeah, we asked people actually, Reggie, whether the U.S. should bear more responsibility in trying to combat climate change. Want to just give you a little sense of what people are saying by taking a look at Twitter. This is coming in from Brittany. We can't do everything. Someone can step up and help us with this. And one more quick comment for you from Karmic Fever. Contrary to popular opinion, the U.S. isn't the biggest polluter in the world. We shouldn't have to carry more than our fair share. Of course, the U.S. right up there with China. That is, just by a hair, the biggest polluter in the world. We'll keep an eye on this for you, Reggie.
All right, so let's get into it. We are going to bring in our two bloggers today. First, Steve Cochran. He directs the Environmental Defense Fund's National Climate Campaign. Steve, a pleasure to have you.
Thanks. Good to be here.
We're also joined by Andrew Light, Senior Fellow at American Progress. Andrew, thank you as well.
Thank you, Reggie.
All right, so let's get into this, because that person who wrote into us on Twitter brings up a point, saying that we're not the only ones in this game, but we are largely, at least per capita, the ones responsible for the situation that we're in right now. We are great polluters in this world. So now that the UN is together and we're gearing up for this December conference in Copenhagen, what hope do we have, Steve, of actually hammering out an agreement?
You know that the only way you make progress is to talk, and there's a lot of that going on. We need to see as much action as we can. I think there's going to be progress made. Is it going to be as much as we need? I think the answer to that is probably not yet. But the thing that we can't do is somehow throw up our hands, walk away and say, well, this isn't getting as much done as we need to. We need to keep at it. The president's there talking about it today and tomorrow, and then the G20 will be talking about it as well. I think we have some hope to be able to make progress.
Andrew, you know, much of the talk has been around 2050 in order to reduce carbon emissions by a certain level by that time. By 2050, most of these leaders are not going to be in their positions if they're even going to be alive. So shouldn't there be a closer date? And what should that benchmark be?
Well, most people talk about 2020 as the most important interim benchmark, and there's some disagreement internationally on exactly what developed countries should be aiming to do by 2020. But I'm actually quite confident that by the time we get to Copenhagen, we'll have made some important steps towards reconciling those differences. And then probably 6 months down the road, I think we'll get to a better sense of exactly what our cut should be by 2020.
So, Steve, what is the U.S. role in all of this? What have we done so far to prove that we're going to be leaders in this, or have we?
Well, we're just sneaking up on being a leader right now. For the last decade, we haven't at all. In fact, we've led in the wrong direction. Obviously, the administration change has made a huge difference in beginning to focus on this. I want to give the administration tremendous credit for doing that. We've got to do more than that because the Congress has its role to play as well. The House stepped forward and moved a bill. That's important, but there are two houses in the Congress. The Senate needs to do the same. That's going to require significant leadership out of the Senate and out of the White House to be able to be successful, and we're not seeing that yet. That's what we have to get to. In that case, when we do that, we will be setting a model for the world. We'll be taking our responsibility and be able to have the moral standing, frankly, to be able to talk to China, to talk to any of the others, to say, we're doing our part, you need to do your part. We have then the best negotiating position we have. Right now, it's hard for us to negotiate effectively because we haven't taken our own responsibility yet.
Yeah, and you know, jumping off that point, Steve, Andrew, earlier today we heard from the president, and he was talking sort of in veiled terms about countries like China and India and how they really need to step up to the plate. You know, Steve brings up a good point. Are we able to sort of give that moral imperative without following that own advice ourselves?
No, I completely agree with Steve on this, but I think it is important that we recognize the importance of today's address. This is the first time an American president has ever addressed the world and admitted that we have not lived up to our responsibilities as certainly the world's second largest emitter, but as your colleague said, just by hair, in the world's largest per capita emitter. So just a one sentence from the speech today. It is true that for too many years, mankind has been slow to respond to or even recognize the magnitude of the climate threat. It is true of my country as well. We recognize that, but this is a new day. And I think that though the president has made it clear that the U.S. is back at the table to come to a solution about climate change, he made it absolutely crystal clear today. He also identified a couple important places where new programs where the U.S. is actually going to put up and begin to make the moves towards building the confidence that Steve was talking about to get to a global deal in Copenhagen.
Again, we're talking right now to Andrew Light from AmericanProgress.org and Steve Cochran. He's from the Environmental Defense Fund. We'll get back to both of you gentlemen in just a second. Let's head over to Namwa to see what people are saying at home. I'm interested to see where this is going.
Yeah, it is interesting to follow, so let's get right to Facebook because we asked about whether the U.S. should carry more responsibility for bringing about changes to our approach to climate change. Let's start with Jeff, who says, the last 20 years have been about the lack of Americans taking responsibilities, from SUVs to wars for oil. Who thinks they're ever going to wake up and own up to the issues to do the right thing? Waiting for them, but presumably meaning other countries, is a cop-out. Make the impact every day, starting with your own choices. And we have this from Joseph, who adds, even if we change our ways, it won't change the world. There are countries that don't care about greenhouse gases. We should focus on more dire needs and stop appeasing enemy nations. And let's wrap things up with a comment from Alex, who says, I think the U.S. should not carry more responsibility. The efforts to combat climate change depend on other countries too. Rich nations should think together to protect planet Earth. It is not time to discuss which country is more responsible or not. It is time to act and work together. I think the nature deserves our help. So I'm wondering, Reggie, about this idea of acting together. I mean, looking ahead to Copenhagen, we're talking about something like 200 countries needing to sign on to this agreement. That sounds like a tall order.
Yeah, and let me put that to Steve, because I think that's an interesting comment that I bet a lot of our viewers share. They say, why does it matter whose responsibility is what? We're all in this together. There's one planet. But doesn't it make a difference, Steve? I mean, if you have a country like China and a country like the U.S. producing so much that is harmful to the Earth, I mean, shouldn't we be more responsible than countries that aren't doing that?
Well, what the math says is that we're all going to have to step up and do our part. And I think the folks who